In the high-stakes theater of global business, empires rarely fall because of a superior army. They don't usually die because they lack intelligence or money. They die because they lost the most valuable thing an empire can possess, the ability to see the future they once created. It is December 2022. While the rest of the world is winding down for the holiday season, a silent, invisible fire is spreading through the halls of the most powerful technology company in history. Behind the glass walls of the Googleplex, the atmosphere isn't festive, it's clinical, it's tense, and it is terrified. A phrase was whispered through the internal channels, a code red. This is a term reserved for moments when the company believes something fundamental is at risk. Usually, it's about a massive hack or a system failure, but this time, the servers were running perfectly. The search bar was still there. The revenue was flowing. Sundar Pichai, a leader known for his calculated calm, was staring at a simple chat window. It was a product from a research lab that once looked like an outsider. But Pichai knew better. He wasn't looking at a competitor, he was looking at a mirror. And for the first time in 25 years, the mirror showed an empire that had become too heavy to move. At that very moment, a terrifying realization echoed through the executive war rooms. The future of the internet might no longer need Google search. This is not a simple story about artificial intelligence. This is a story about power, fear, and the dangerous weight of success. How a company with the world's most talented engineers and a global river of user data found itself in a desperate race to justify its own existence. Why was Google too afraid to release the very weapons it had invented years ago? How did the hunter become the hunted? Today, we go inside the code red. We analyze the moment the empire's shadow became its own prison. Welcome to the Pivot Point. Subscribe to see the next empire before it falls. Let's begin. To understand why Google didn't strike first, you have to realize one thing. They didn't just see the future, they built it. Long before OpenAI became a household name, Google was the undisputed king of artificial intelligence. They weren't just in the race, they were the architects of the track. In 2017, a team of 8 researchers inside Google published a paper with a quiet, almost poetic title, "Attention is all you need." At the time, the business world ignored it. But that paper quietly changed the future of artificial intelligence. It introduced the transformer, the architecture behind much of modern generative AI. It was the spark that would later light OpenAI's fire. Google had everything an empire could dream of, the most brilliant AI minds on the planet, specialized chips, and a global river of user data that few others could match. Google was a fortress of innovation, but inside that fortress, a dangerous paradox was growing. You see, Google's advertising machine, the one that financed the entire empire, depends on one thing: friction. They make money when you search, when you browse, when you click on links. But a truly great AI doesn't want you to click, it wants to give you the answer. Right now, without the links, without the ads. This was the invisible trap. The better their AI became, the more dangerous it became for Google's own business logic. While a lean lab like OpenAI could afford to be messy and loud, Google was held back behind layers of caution, reputation risk, and corporate logic. They had the technology, but they were paralyzed by the responsibility of being the world's primary source of truth. Every time their engineers proposed a bold move, the machinery of the empire asked, what if it hallucinates? What if it offends? And, most importantly, what if it works so well that people stop searching? Google wasn't slow because they were lazy. They were slow because they were too successful to risk a revolution. They already had the future in their hands, but they couldn't bring themselves to open the box. November 30th, 2022. It began quietly. No global launch event, no billion-dollar marketing campaign, no dramatic keynote, just a simple chat window and a question. Within 5 days, 1 million people had signed up. Within 2 months, analysts estimated it had reached 100 million monthly active users. They called it one of the fastest-growing consumer applications ever recorded. But Google wasn't afraid of the numbers. Google was afraid of what the numbers revealed. For 25 years, the internet had been built around one ritual. You had a question, you typed it into a search bar, Google gave you links, and then you did the work. You opened tabs, you compared sources, you scrolled past ads, you searched through the search results. But ChatGPT changed the feeling of the internet. For the first time, millions of people felt that an answer could come without the search. This was the moment search stopped feeling inevitable. OpenAI didn't build a better Google, it showed people a different habit, a world where some questions no longer needed a search engine. And for Google, that was not just competition, it was an existential threat. The panic was immediate. Sundar Pichai turned again to Larry Page and Sergey Brin, the founders who had built the original search empire. Not because Google lacked talent, not because Google lacked technology, but because the question had changed. The old question was, how do we organize the world's information? The new question was, what happens when people stop looking for it? Google suddenly looked heavy, not weak. Heavy, like an empire built for one world, waking up inside another. It had the money, it had the engineers, it had the research, but OpenAI had changed the tempo. And in technology, tempo can become destiny. The question was no longer whether Google could build AI, the question was whether Google could survive what AI would do to Google. The response was not calm, it was controlled panic. Google, a company built on careful testing, controlled launches, and reputation management, was suddenly forced to move at the speed of a startup. The empire was striking back, but for the first time, it was not choosing the tempo. February 2023. Google introduced Bard, its first public answer to ChatGPT, but in a promotional demo, Bard made a factual mistake. Within hours, roughly $100 billion of Alphabet's market value was erased. This was the weight of the empire. When a startup makes a mistake, it becomes a lesson. When Google makes one, it becomes a global headline. Then, the pressure deepened. Microsoft, one of Google's oldest rivals, turned OpenAI's technology into a weapon for search by bringing generative AI into Bing. Microsoft did something rare. It forced Google to react. Satya Nadella later said he wanted people to know that Microsoft had made Google dance. And suddenly, Google was no longer leading the rhythm. This was not just a technical battle, it was a crisis of identity. Google had the research, it had the chips, it had the engineers, it had the data, but it also had something OpenAI did not have, a massive business model to protect. Every new AI answer threatened the advertising machine that financed the empire. Google was trying to build the future without burning down the house that paid for it. So Google consolidated its power. Brain and DeepMind were brought together into Google DeepMind, consolidation of talent, pressure, and survival instinct. From that pressure came Gemini, a signal to the world that Google was still in the race, still powerful, still dangerous, but the faster the empire moved, the more the pressure showed. The empire was not weak, it was rushing, and rushing made its weight visible. Google had entered the oldest trap in business, the trap that claims giants at the height of their power. They were so busy defending the world they had built that they almost lost their grip on the world that was coming. The crown was becoming a shackle. History is a graveyard of giants who thought they were too big to fail. But Google's story is different. They didn't fall because they were obsolete. They stumbled because they were too successful. You see, Google's real enemy was never OpenAI. It was never Sam Altman or Satya Nadella. Their real enemy was the ghost of their own greatness, the crushing fear of becoming something smaller than Google Search. For 20 years, Google wasn't just a company. It was a verb. To search was to Google. But in the age of generative intelligence, the world began to search less like users and ask more like humans. And Google's tragedy was not that it lacked imagination, it was that imagination had to pass through the machinery of an empire. This is the ultimate lesson of the pivot point. Success creates a cage made of gold. The more you win, the harder it is to risk it all on a new game. OpenAI had far less to protect. Google had the burden of having everything, because the most dangerous moment for any empire is when protecting the present becomes more important than inventing the future. The war for AI is far from over, but the rules of the game have changed forever. Welcome to the next chapter. Subscribe to see the next empire before it falls.